Hey friends, welcome back to my garden. If you're new here, my name is Jen. I do cooking, canning, and food preservation videos every Tuesday, and sometimes I post vlog content on Fridays. If that seems like the sort of content you'd be into, I hope that you'll consider subscribing and sticking around. Today, we are here for the last garden vlog of 2024. Today is the day where we get the garden put to bed for the winter. I have some help in the garden today, including my husband and his shark shoes. I told him I was leaving that in there and he didn't believe me. So, anyhow, I'm struggling with putting the garden to bed because as you can see, I still have some beautiful flowers going on up here. My herbs are still doing really well. And honestly, this is pretty much unheard of to have this many flowers for me almost to Thanksgiving. But I know that you have to do out with the old to have in with the new. Here is a sneak peek of a weird tomato volunteer in November. I don't know what's up with that, but yeah. So I'm going to start with just taking out all of my pepper plants and moving them onto the compost. Now, normally I won't compost plants that have disease, but all of these plants are still healthy. In fact, you can probably see here that there are still some peppers on this plant, but they just aren't going to have enough sun to ripen all the way. So I'm just going to go ahead and give them to the compost and maybe use it next year. Now I let all of my basil plants go to seed and the pots are just full of basil seed. So, I wasn't really expecting to even have basil this year. I've never really had any luck with basil, but these three plants really flourished. And so I'm totally okay with all of the seeds in these pots here because maybe next year I won't have to purchase basil starts or start it myself. They might just come up on their own in the garden, which who doesn't love basil? So I'm just pulling these plants out, and I do realize that it is always better to try and cut the plants off and leave the root systems in place so that they can feed the soil. But because I'm using these felt bags, um, I don't want to leave a big stalk sticking up out of the center of the pot that probably isn't going to have time to break down over the winter. So all of these flowers with their big stalks, the okra in the center bed, I'm just pulling them all up and I'm going to be adding some more soil to top this bed off. If you've been here for the majority of the summer, you know that this metal bed here in the center of my garden is a new addition. So when I initially put soil in it, I did not fill it up all the way and it has settled some over the summer. So I'm going to go ahead and add some more soil to that before I plant in it today. And then in the spring, I'll make sure that I fertilize and add all the amendments that I need to get this soil healthy again. It is kind of my big hopes and dreams that this next spring I'll be able to add a few more of these metal raised beds to my garden. I'd like to eventually phase out all of the felt bags and even the in-ground beds that I have, I would like to, at some point in time in the future, switch over to these metal beds. These metal beds really held the moisture well, and while felt bags are a great starting point, they've done really well for me for like 2 or 3 years. They're starting to fall apart, and because they're black, they do get pretty hot in the summertime. So some things just do better than others in those felt bags. And it is just my opinion that I would prefer these metal beds um, just for the long haul. This one held up really well for me, and I'll probably purchase from the same company again. I just picked it up off Amazon. It was only like $39 for this huge bed. So yeah, that's the goal. That's the end plan, is to eventually have all metal beds in this garden. But for now, we just add a little bit at a time. One of the things I noticed while I was pulling all of this stuff up out of this bed was there was a ton of flower seed scattered throughout this bed. So that means in the spring, I'm probably going to have a ton of volunteer snapdragons and straw flowers, which is fine. The only thing I'm putting in this bed, in fact, I plan it on this day, is my garlic. I had a little space left over down at the end of my bed when I finished planting my garlic, but I'm not really sure what I'm gonna do with it. Initially, I thought maybe I'll plant just a few onions down there with it, but I think I'll probably put onions somewhere else next year and maybe just put herbs down there. Just have them come back, hopefully over winter, better in that raised metal bed than they do in the felt bags. So we'll just have to wait until spring. I have, all winter long to try to figure out what I want to do with that. So. Moving on to this bed over here, I'm just pulling up some more pepper plants. It was kind of heartbreaking actually because a lot of these peppers got like a second wind and then they got a third wind and the tops of them were lush and beautiful and they were covered in flowers, but days are shorter, not enough sunlight, and in fact, the day after I got my garlic planted here, it was sleeting and we had snow flurries. So I was really thankful that I got my garlic in time. It was kind of a balancing game trying to figure out when to get the garlic in because it had been so darn warm. I mean, one day you're in a tank top, the next day you were in a hoodie. So now that the weather has kind of leveled out, I think I made a good decision in getting it in when I did. And as I was ripping out the cucamelon vines, you can see that I let them dry up. It's a lot easier to remove them once they're dry than it is to fight with living vines. But I decided I'm probably never going to be free of cucamelons. And I will show you here at the end when I do the last walkthrough in the garden that there are cucamelons everywhere. I told my husband I'm gonna have to go up there with a rake and try to pick up as many of them as possible, but even then, there's no way I'm gonna get them all. There are just too many. I was inundated with them, and that is fine. If I, find volunteers where I don't want them next year, I'll just pull them up. So I added a few more bags of soil. This is that soil that I got on sale last spring, and I just stacked it up outside my garden, and I'm really glad I did because it's still coming in very handy. In fact, I think I still have a couple bags. So I just spread it out with my fingers. I did leave all of the twigs and sticks and leaves and things like that just so that they can break down over the winter and feed the soil again since instead of cutting the plants off, I pulled them up. So I ended up adding 3 bags to this bed and it still isn't filled all the way up, but that's okay. It doesn't need to be. I will, continue to add soil every season and eventually this bed will be full all the way to the top. There's no rush. There is plenty of soil here. You saw that I was very successful in growing okra and flowers in this bed. So, adding more soil to it, I have no concerns about things growing here next year. So I'm just going to go ahead and plant my garlic in this bed. And this is garlic that I grew last year. These are just some of the cloves that I saved back to plant myself. Normally, I would order my garlic from, a seed company, but finances just weren't in a good spot for me this year to do that. So I decided to just plant my own garlic. I know that it's not going to be guaranteed disease free, but that's okay. If we get garlic, we get garlic, and if we don't, it's not the end of the world, but I'm going to at least try. So I made a hole about 2 or 3 inches apart. I want to give these guys lots of space. Now, the first year I grew garlic, I had an incredible year. Last year was okay. I did lose a lot of garlic to these weird little, I won't even call them a caterpillar. It was more like a maggot. Like they rotted in the soil. And then the rest of them, I tried a different way of drying them, just laying them flat when the year before I hung them up. And it's like they just didn't dry well. They didn't get good enough airflow, and I lost more garlic. So, I'm trying something new every year until I find what works for me, but I do believe I'm going to go back to hanging my garlic dry because it did a lot better. I believe on this day I actually planted 60 cloves. So hey, if only half of them come up, that's still really good odds. My lettuce is still growing and I have a few radishes, so I'm just going to leave those guys alone. And I was going to cut the green beans off because I thought they were done, but they're still doing something, so I'm just going to leave them and see what happens. You can see here I put a little metal marker in the bed. That's where my garlic stops. So I ended up having about 1.5 feet of space down here on this end. And I think I'm just going to plant some herbs in there next year to occupy that space, and we'll do onions somewhere else. But yep, that's it. All I have left to do up there is just to throw some mulch over that garlic for the season. Try to pick up these thousands of cucamelons that are laying around rotting. And just pick the sugar snap peas and the green beans as they come along, and when they're done, they're done. And I will start garden vlogs again around February of next year. But in the meantime, I'll still be posting vlogs. It's just going to be different kinds of things. I have some painting projects I might share with you guys. And of course, you know, I always do my Mennonite store hauls. I have a couple of beds that need cardboard laid on them to control the weeds, but I probably won't film that. But yeah, even if I'm not doing garden vlogs, I'm going to try to get a Friday vlog out to you whenever I'm able to. And you know, you can always rely on my cooking videos on Tuesdays. So until next time, friends, happy gardening.